It was supposed to be a quiet evening. Chuck Norris walked into a restaurant he knew better than anyone else. Not as a celebrity, not as a legend, but as a regular customer. No bodyguards, no cameras, just a simple jacket, a calm expression, and the kind of presence that doesn't beg for attention. The restaurant was busy. Plates clattered. People laughed. Staff moved fast, stressed, distracted. Chuck waited near the entrance for a table, standing politely, hands relaxed at his sides. That's when things went wrong. A staff member glanced at him, just once, and immediately looked away. No greeting. No, sir. I'll be right with you. Minutes passed. Other guests walked in after him and were seated first. Chuck didn't complain. He didn't interrupt. He just waited. Finally, he stepped forward and spoke calmly, asking if a table was available. The response wasn't what anyone would expect. The staff member sighed loudly, clearly annoyed, and replied with a sharp tone, impatient, dismissive, almost insulting. The message was clear: you're not important here. A few nearby customers noticed. Some exchanged looks. Something fell off. Chuck tried again, still respectful, still composed. But instead of easing the situation, his calm seemed to irritate the staff even more. The attitude hardened. The tone sharpened. One comment, thrown casually, crossed the line. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was disrespectful enough to sting. Chuck paused. For a brief moment, the noise of the restaurant seemed to fade. He didn't react the way most people would. No anger. No raised voice. No flexing of ego. Just silence. What the staff didn't know, what no one there realized yet, was that the man they were brushing off wasn't just another customer. He was the owner. He was the face behind the name on the wall. And he was about to let the situation play out. Not to embarrass anyone, but to reveal something far more important about respect, character, and how people are treated when no one thinks it matters. And what happened next left the entire restaurant in shock. The moment passed, but the tension didn't. Chuck Norris stepped slightly to the side, giving the staff space to do their job. He didn't argue. He didn't demand special treatment. He simply waited again, calm and patient, as if the earlier disrespect hadn't happened. But it did happen, and it showed. The same staff member walked past him, twice without eye contact. Each time, new customers were greeted warmly, menus handed out, smiles exchanged. Chuck stood there quietly, ignored like he didn't belong. A woman sitting nearby noticed it first. She leaned toward her companion and whispered something. Another customer looked up from his phone and frowned. The contrast was obvious now. Chuck finally spoke again, his voice steady and polite. "Excuse me," he said. "I've been waiting a while. I just wanted to check if there's an estimated time." The response came fast and sharp. The staff member rolled their eyes and replied in a clipped tone, suggesting he wait his turn or come back later if he didn't like it. No explanation, no apology, just irritation. A few heads turned. This wasn't just bad service anymore. It felt personal. Chuck nodded once, acknowledging the words, but not accepting the attitude. He took a slow breath. Anyone else might have snapped back by now. Anyone else might have walked out. But Chuck stayed. That choice alone shifted the energy in the room. A man near the counter quietly pulled out his phone. Not obviously, not dramatically, but enough to start recording. Another person did the same. Not because they recognized Chuck, but because something felt wrong, and people instinctively knew this moment might matter. The staff member noticed the phones. Their posture stiffened. Their tone changed. Not calmer, but more defensive. They spoke louder now, as if volume could justify behavior. A remark was made about people causing trouble and holding up service. Chuck didn't respond immediately. He looked around the restaurant, at the families eating, the couples talking, the staff rushing back and forth. This place wasn't just a business to him. It was something he cared about, and seeing this unfold clearly wasn't easy. Still, he kept his voice low. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," he said. "I'm just asking to be treated fairly." That sentence should have ended the situation. Instead, it poured fuel on it. The staff member scoffed and turned away mid-sentence, muttering something under their breath. It wasn't shouted, but it was loud enough to be heard by the nearest tables. A few customers reacted immediately. One shook his head. Another whispered, "That's not right." The tension spread outward like ripples in water. Chuck stood there, hands relaxed, expression unchanged, but his silence now carried weight. It wasn't weakness. It was control. The staff member returned moments later, this time with a manager trailing behind them. Their body language said it all, pointing, explaining, framing Chuck as the problem. The manager looked at Chuck quickly, then back at the staff member, listening. Before the manager could speak, Chuck addressed them calmly. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. "I'm just asking for basic respect." The manager hesitated. Phones were still recording. Conversations around the restaurant had slowed. People were paying attention now. This was no longer a private interaction at the front desk. It was public, and whatever happened next would define the moment. Before the manager could respond, the staff member interrupted again, defensive, frustrated, doubling down instead of backing off. That's when the atmosphere shifted completely. Not because Chuck raised his voice, not because he revealed who he was, but because everyone in that room could now see one thing clearly. This wasn't about a table anymore. It was about how someone is treated when the person serving them thinks they have no power, no status, no importance. And as the tension reached its breaking point, one question hung silently in the air, unanswered, uncomfortable, unavoidable. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. Because what was about to happen next would change everything. The manager stood there for a moment, caught between the staff member's agitation and Chuck's calm presence. You could tell they were trying to assess the situation quickly. Who was right, who was wrong, and how to end this without making a scene. But the scene had already started. Before the manager could speak properly, the staff member jumped in again, their voice tighter now, sharper. They spoke fast, defensive, painting Chuck as difficult, impatient, someone who didn't understand how busy things were. Chuck listened without interrupting. That alone unsettled people. Most customers in his position would have reacted by now, raised their voice, argued, or walked out in frustration. Chuck did none of that. He stood straight, eyes steady, letting the accusations land without pushing back. If you were in Chuck's place, would you stay calm and wait, or stand up and speak immediately? Comment what you would do and why. The manager finally addressed him. "Sir," they said, measured but firm, "if there's an issue, we can ask you to step aside so we don't block the entrance." The words weren't aggressive, but the implication was clear. Step aside. Move out of the way. You're the problem here. A quiet murmur spread through the nearby tables. Someone sighed loudly. Another customer leaned forward, watching closely. The phones were still up. Recording hadn't stopped. Chuck took a slow breath. "I'm happy to step aside," he said calmly, "but I won't accept being spoken to disrespectfully." The staff member scoffed again. At this point, the disrespect wasn't subtle anymore. A sarcastic comment followed, about people acting important and expecting special treatment. It was said with a half-smile, the kind that pretends to be casual but carries clear insult underneath. That comment changed the energy completely. A woman near the window shook her head and whispered, "That's unnecessary." A man at the counter muttered something under his breath. You could feel the crowd starting to shift, not toward anger, but toward judgment. Not of Chuck, of the staff. The manager noticed it too. They glanced around, suddenly aware that this wasn't just between three people anymore. This was being watched, recorded, interpreted. Try to regain control. The manager spoke again, this time a bit more authoritative. "Sir, if you continue to argue, I'll have to ask you to leave." That was the escalation. Not shouted, not dramatic, but serious. For the first time since he walked in, Chuck paused longer than usual before responding. Not because he was afraid, because he was choosing his next move carefully. He looked at the manager, then briefly at the staff member, and then around the restaurant. His gaze wasn't confrontational, it was reflective, almost disappointed. "I'm not arguing," he said quietly. "I'm standing here because I believe everyone deserves respect, whether you recognize them or not." The words landed heavy. The staff member opened their mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The manager shifted their weight, clearly uncomfortable now. Silence filled the space between the counter and the entrance. In that silence, the imbalance of power became obvious. The staff thought they had control. The manager thought authority would end the issue. but neither realized they were losing the room. Chuck wasn't escalating with volume or anger. He was escalating with composure. The staff member, feeling exposed, tried one last tactic: dismissal. "Look," they said, waving a hand, "we don't have time for this. You can wait, or you can leave." A clear challenge. Chuck nodded slowly. "I'll wait," he said, "but I won't be spoken to like that." That line drew a visible reaction. A few customers straightened in their seats. Someone near the door whispered, "He's right." The phones adjusted angles, zooming in slightly, catching every word now. The manager hesitated again. This was no longer a customer service issue. It was a test of character. Chuck wasn't demanding recognition. He wasn't revealing who he was. He wasn't flexing power. He was doing something far more uncomfortable for the people on the other side of the counter. He was forcing them to confront how they treat someone they believe doesn't matter. And that's when the tension hit its absolute peak. Because everyone watching, both in the restaurant and behind their screens, knew the truth was coming. Not yet, but soon. Before that truth revealed itself, one question lingered in every mind, pressing, personal, impossible to ignore. If this were you, would you walk away to protect your peace? Or would you stand your ground and demand respect? Because what happened next didn't just change the situation. It flipped the entire story on its head. The silence didn't last long, but it lingered just enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Conversations around the restaurant tried to resume, but they came back quieter than before. Forks clinked against plates. Someone laughed a little too loudly, as if to pretend nothing unusual was happening. But no one had really moved on, because all eyes kept drifting back to the front. Chuck Norris stood near the entrance, exactly where he'd been asked to step aside. Calm, patient, unmoved. The staff member returned to their station, but their movements were stiff now, forced, mechanical. The manager stayed close, pretending to review something on a tablet, while clearly listening to everything around them. That's when it happened. A man seated a few tables away leaned back slightly and squinted toward the entrance. He tilted his head, studying Chuck's face more closely. Not staring, just noticing. Something clicked. He leaned toward the woman sitting across from him and whispered, barely audible, "Doesn't that guy look like—" She followed his gaze. Looked for a second, then another. Her eyes widened just a bit. "No way," she whispered back. But she kept looking. A few seconds later, she subtly pulled out her phone, not to record the confrontation, but to search. Her thumb moved quickly. A pause. Then her expression changed completely. Shock, certainty, disbelief. She leaned closer to the man again, voice trembling with excitement. "That's him," she said. "That's Chuck Norris." The man's eyes snapped back to the entrance. He looked again, this time really looking. The posture, the face, the unmistakable calm presence. "Oh my God," he muttered. They weren't loud. They weren't trying to cause a scene. But whispers spread fast in a quiet room. 2 tables over, someone caught the exchange. A head turned, then another. "That's Chuck Norris?" "No, it can't be. Why would he be standing there?" People started connecting dots. The name on the restaurant wall, the face at the entrance, the way he carried himself. Phones shifted, not just recording now, but zooming, searching, comparing. Meanwhile, the staff remained completely unaware. The same staff member walked past Chuck again, still tense, still guarded, still acting as if he were just another problem customer. No apology, no second look. Chuck noticed a change in the room. He felt the eyes. He heard the whispers, but he didn't acknowledge any of it. That was the part that surprised people the most. He could have ended it right there. One sentence, one reveal, one name, but he didn't. Instead, he kept his gaze forward, respectful, almost intentionally anonymous. The manager finally glanced up and noticed the energy shift. People weren't just watching anymore. They were aware. Something had changed, and they didn't know why. They leaned toward the staff member and whispered something urgently. The staff member frowned, confused. "What?" they asked quietly. The manager didn't answer immediately. They looked toward Chuck again, longer this time. Studied him. Really studied him. Doubt crept in. Not recognition yet, but uncertainty. A customer near the entrance couldn't help themselves anymore. They spoke softly, not to Chuck, but to the manager. "You might want to check who you're talking to," they said. The manager froze. "Excuse me?" they replied. The customer nodded subtly toward Chuck. "I'm just saying," they added, "you might want to be careful." That was enough. The manager's expression shifted from authority to concern in seconds. They looked back at Chuck, then at the staff member, then around the room full of phones, whispers, and watching eyes. The staff member felt it too. Would you walk away to avoid conflict, or stand your ground to demand respect? Share your choice in the comments. They turned slowly, noticing the stares, the tension, the sudden silence whenever they spoke. "What?" they asked, defensive now. "What's everyone looking at?" No one answered them, because the truth was right there, standing quietly, unannounced, unused. The recognition had begun, but the reveal hadn't happened yet. And that made the moment even heavier, because everyone watching now knew something the staff didn't. And they knew that when the truth finally came out, there would be no way to undo what had already been said. By now, the restaurant felt different. Not loud, not chaotic, just heavy. The kind of silence that settles when people sense something important is happening. Conversations had faded into background noise. Even the kitchen clatter seemed distant. Everyone was watching, even if they pretended not to be. The staff member stood behind the counter, visibly uncomfortable now. The confidence they'd had earlier was gone, replaced with irritation and unease. The manager hovered close, no longer sure which side of the situation they were standing on. Chuck Norris remained exactly where he was. Calm, grounded, unshaken. He didn't move forward. He didn't step back. He didn't raise his voice. But when he finally spoke again, the tone was different. Not defensive, not reactive. Intentional. "I want to be very clear," he said, looking directly at the manager, not the staff member. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm not here to demand anything special." The room quieted further. "I'm here as a customer," he continued, "and I expect the same respect you'd give anyone else who walks through that door." The staff member crossed their arms, trying to hold on to control, but it was slipping. Their expression said they didn't like where this was going. Chuck didn't pause. "Too often," he said calmly, "people decide how much respect someone deserves based on how they look, how they dress, or whether they think that person matters." A few heads nodded. Someone near the back murmured, "Exactly." The manager swallowed. Chuck turned slightly, addressing the room without raising his voice, just enough to be heard. "This isn't about a table," he said. "It's about how easily respect disappears when you think no one's watching." That line hit hard. The staff member tried to interrupt. "We didn't," they started. Chuck raised a hand gently, not aggressively, just enough to stop the interruption. "Please," he said, "let me finish." And surprisingly, they did. That moment alone changed everything. "I've been patient," Chuck continued. "I've spoken respectfully, and I've been met with dismissiveness, sarcasm, and insults. No exaggeration, no drama, just facts. If this is how someone is treated when they believe they're ordinary," he added, "then that's a problem bigger than me." The manager looked down. The staff member shifted their weight, clearly realizing they had lost the room. The crowd wasn't angry, but they were aligned. Aligned with Chuck. "I'm not asking for an apology right now," Chuck said. "And I'm not asking for special treatment. That surprised people. I'm asking you to reflect," he said, meeting the manager's eyes again. "Because respect shouldn't depend on who someone is. It should be automatic." Silence followed. No one clapped. No one spoke. But everyone felt it. The staff member looked around, noticing for the first time that no one was on their side anymore. The phones, the stares, the stillness, it all pointed one way. They opened their mouth, then closed it. The manager took a breath, clearly realizing the seriousness of what had just happened. "I understand," they said quietly. "Let me look into this." Chuck nodded once. No smile, no satisfaction, no ego, just composure. But the turning point had already happened. The staff thought they were dealing with a difficult customer. Now, they realized they were facing something much harder. A man who didn't need recognition to command respect. A man who wasn't using power, but principle. And in that moment, the room collectively understood something important. The truth was about to come out. Not because Chuck planned to reveal it, but because the situation had reached a point where it couldn't stay hidden anymore. All it would take was one sentence, one confirmation, one name, and everything would change. The manager stepped away from the counter, phone in hand. At first, no one thought much of it. Managers check things all the time, reservations, complaints, schedules. But this time felt different. The manager didn't scroll casually. They typed carefully, then stopped. Their posture changed. They looked up at Chuck again, not with authority this time, but with focus. Real focus. They looked back down at the phone, then at the wall, then at Chuck. The color drained from their face. The manager walked back slowly, lowering their voice as they spoke. "Sir," they said, carefully, "may I ask your name?" The restaurant went silent. Not dramatic silence. Uncomfortable silence. Chuck looked at them for a moment. He didn't hesitate. He didn't smile. "Chuck," he said simply. The manager swallowed. "Chuck Norris?" they asked. That was it. The reaction wasn't loud, but it was instant. A wave moved through the room. Gasps. Hands flying to mouths. Phones lifting higher. Someone whispered, "I knew it." Another muttered, "Oh no." The staff member froze. Their eyes widened. Their face went pale. The confidence they'd been clinging to collapsed in seconds. They looked at Chuck again, really looked at him this time. The calm, the control, the patience. Everything suddenly made sense. "Oh," they said quietly. The manager straightened immediately. I had no idea," they said quickly. "I'm so sorry. This should never have happened." They turned sharply toward the staff member, their tone completely different now. Serious. Controlled. Final. "We need to talk. Now." The power had flipped, but Chuck didn't move. He didn't look relieved. He didn't look satisfied. He raised a hand gently. "Please," he said, "don't apologize because of my name." The manager paused. "Apologize because of how I was treated before you knew who I was." That line hit harder than anything else that night. The staff members' shoulders dropped. Their voice shook when they spoke. "I'm sorry," they said. "I didn't know." Chuck nodded once. "That's the point," he replied. The room stayed quiet and cheering. No clapping, just understanding. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is," Chuck continued calmly, "to treat them with respect." The manager nodded slowly. "You're right," they said, "and we'll handle this." The staff members stepped back, eyes down, fully aware now, not of Chuck's fame, but of their own mistake. Around the restaurant, people felt it. This wasn't about embarrassment anymore. It was about accountability. Chuck finally turned toward the door. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't been seated. And yet, he'd already left a bigger impact than most customers ever could. As he walked away, phones followed him, but he didn't acknowledge them. He didn't wave. He didn't pose. Because the message had already been delivered. And it was simple. Respect should come first, not after recognition. Before the moment ended, one question settled in everyone's mind. Heavy, unavoidable, and deeply uncomfortable. Should someone only be treated with respect after their identity is revealed? Because if the answer is no, then this moment wasn't about Chuck Norris at all. It was about all of US.by the next morning. The video was everywhere. What started as a quiet moment in a restaurant had exploded across social media. Clips of Chuck Norris standing calmly at the entrance, being ignored, spoken down to, and then finally revealed, spread fast. Millions of views in hours. Comments pouring in from all over the world. People weren't just watching. They were reacting. Some were angry at how he was treated before his identity was known. Others praised the way he handled it. No shouting, no threats, no ego. Just calm, steady dignity. The restaurant issued a statement later that day. They apologized publicly, not just to Chuck Norris, but to customers as a whole. They acknowledged the failure, promised better training, and confirmed that the situation with the staff member had been addressed internally. Details weren't shared, but the message was clear. Actions have consequences. What stood out most wasn't the apology. It was Chuck's response. When asked about the incident, he didn't attack anyone. He didn't demand punishment. He didn't even seem interested in the viral attention. Instead, he said something simple. "This wasn't about me. It was about respect." That quote spread almost as fast as the video itself. People shared their own stories in the comments. Times they were ignored, disrespected, judged by appearance, or treated as if they didn't matter. The incident became bigger than one restaurant. It became a mirror, a reminder of how often people change their behavior once status is revealed, and how wrong that is. Support poured in for Chuck, but the praise focused less on who he is and more on how he acted. Calm under pressure, firm without aggression, clear without cruelty. That's what resonated. Even people who had never watched a Chuck Norris movie were sharing the clip, not because of his fame, but because of the lesson. Respect should never be conditional. The restaurant eventually returned to normal. New customers came and went. Tables filled. Orders were taken. But for those who witnessed it, both in person and online, the moment stayed. Because it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. And that's why it mattered. Chuck Norris didn't win that night by revealing his identity. He won by proving that character doesn't need an introduction. And if there's one takeaway from this story, it's this. How you treat someone when you think they don't matter says everything about who you are. So here's the final question for you. If you believe respect should be given to everyone, no matter who they are, type respect in the comments. And if you want more powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe, because moments like this deserve to be seen and remembered.